Speaking of advantages and disadvantages, let's look at kind of the setup for the war for each. The North, they had to be aggressive. Okay, they had to go into the South to fight to regain their lost land. If they stood back and did nothing, then the South is going to win because the South is saying, hey, we're free. If the North doesn't do anything, then the South wins. So they really didn't have to fight until the North did, like the Revolutionary War. The North were fighting on unfamiliar land. The South was fighting at home. They knew the land. We know the importance of that. So those are definitely two advantages for the South over the North. Unfortunately for the South, that is about where the advantages stop. 91% of the factories are in the North. This was good because they were able to produce all these goods and use them for the war. The South, on the other hand, had very few factories. They couldn't produce enough weapons or supplies to keep themselves with what they needed. The North, they could travel further and faster because they had most of the railroad tracks. Only 29% of the nation's railroads went through the South, and most just went one place to another. They didn't have like railroad tracks where they can go long distances. So it just made travel very hard in the South. Horses. The North had almost 3 times the amount of horses as the South. They had a 4.5 million, and the South just had 1.7 million horses. The North had one solid government, and the national government had the majority of the power. The South had a weaker government where the states had more power, and this caused a lot of problems. So let me explain to this. We've talked before if our school is a country, and the principal obviously would be like the president, and then the states would be like the teachers, would be like the governors. And obviously, if Mr. Beals has a rule and we have a rule that's different, but he wins because he's the president. In the South, they had a Confederate government, Confederacy, and what that means is the states would actually have more power than the big government. So if that example, if Mr. Bills had a rule and I had a rule, I could out my rule could overthrow Mr. Bills's rule. So if there's like no gum in school, but I say, hey, you could have it in my class, you could have it in my class. All right. So that's the big difference between a Confederate army or Confederate government and a federal government like what we have. The North had a large navy. The South had very few warships. We kind of mentioned this, but the North had to conquer a large area. The South was defending its home turf. The capital cities for each. In the North, it was Washington, D.C. And in the South, it was the city of Richmond, Virginia. The North had about 22 million people, and the South had close to 9 million. But a lot of the 9 million were slaves. And lastly, the presidents of each. The president of the United States was Abraham Lincoln. He was described as a patient man, strong leader, good sense of humor, very well respected. People liked him, they listened to him. He just kind of commanded respect. Jefferson Davis, on the other hand, he wasn't a bad person, but he never really wanted to be a president. That wasn't his thing. He was kind of named to this and didn't necessarily seek it out. And he kind of liked to keep his plans to himself more than a lot of people. So he wasn't the strongest leader, but he didn't really want to be either. That it just wasn't what he set out to do. A very important name in the war is that of Robert E. Lee, and he was a military leader for the United States for many years, and he was from Virginia. And President Lincoln asked him at the very beginning of the war to command the Union Army, the United States Army. Well, he's from Virginia. And before Virginia decided what they were going to do, Robert E. Lee said, if Virginia stands by the old Union, so will I. But if she secedes, then I will follow with my native state, with my sword, and if need be, my life. So what he's saying there is if Virginia leaves the Union, then he is going to go with Virginia. And if they stay with the Union, then he'll go with the United States and be the commander of the army. Well, we know Virginia left the Union. So not only did they leave the Union, he turned down Lincoln's offer, and he accepted that same position with the Confederacy. So he became the commander of the Confederate Army. So I kind of use this example. I mean, here's a guy who they wanted to be the head man in the fields for the United States, and instead he ended up saying no, thank you, and then went and did it for the Confederate States. I use the example as like if a player plays for the Cardinals and the fans love him and he does a great job and they all want him to stay forever, but he leaves, and not only does he leave, he goes and plays for their rival, the Cubs, or the other way around. It's kind of the same thing. Here's this person that would be great to help, and he thinks about it, but he ends up leaving. And not only does he leave, he goes and takes the same position on the other side. So this worried the United States a lot, and because he was a strong commander and a good leader, and we were just kind of scared about what might happen with him being in charge. So that's all the notes for section 17.1, and we'll do 17.2 next.